Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. We are starting a new playlist called Deadly Destinations, where we travel, we discuss death and murders on the road. I'm in Palm Springs. It's about 120 degrees right now, and we are going to go visit a very infamous location. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. The Palm Springs area is mainly made up of Old Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Rancho Mirage, Indio, La Quinta, and Cathedral City. It is a city of vast contrast. One minute you're in the most beautiful, lush oasis on earth, and then you can literally turn the corner or walk across the street and be in desolate desert with nothing but dust and tumbleweeds. That same contrast exists in the culture. The richest of the rich live and play in Palm Springs, and they coexist with those who work in the service industries that staff and support the very luxurious and over-the-top resorts that the area is so famous for. There is a large LGBT community with lots of events and locations for those residents and visitors. There's world-class luxury shopping and dining that sits next to everyday markets and restaurants. The atmosphere is casual and relaxed, and there are a lot of retirees and vacationers there year-round that add to kind of the chill vibe of the whole area. Many celebrities live here, and the main roads have names like Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, and Gene Autry. Right now, it is 120 degrees here, which even for Palm Springs is unusually hot for September. There's the large fire burning in Los Angeles. You'll see kind of smoke and haze in the air that's unusual for this area, and that is due to the fires. We are still in the midst of a pandemic, and in fact, this is the first time I have personally been in public since about March, so more than 6 months, and it feels very strange. Even with all that is happening, the laid-back vibe remains here, and the beautiful hotels and resorts seem almost untouched by all that's happening. But even with all the beauty and luxury in the area, sometimes tragedy and murder come to Palm Springs and visit even the most well-heeled and pampered among us. That's exactly what happened on a warm October evening in 1978 when two affluent people and their maid were executed in their beautiful home nestled up against the mountains of Old Palm Springs. Ed and Sophia Friendly, husband and wife, ages 74 and 71, and Frances Williams, their 67-year-old maid, were brutally murdered just before they sat down to eat a fish dinner. Sophia was wearing a floor-length caftan and gold shoes. Ed wore a dinner jacket, and the couple's maid set the dining room table with crystal and a silver service that included fish knives. A dinner of white fish and vegetables was in the oven ready to be served. At about 7 p.m., the killer walked to the front door of the 3-bedroom Mediterranean-style villa at 893 Camino del Sur. Without knowing it, Sophia Friendly opened the door to her killer. Words were exchanged, and the killer pulled out a weapon. Sophia turned to run down the hallway, only making it a step or two before she was shot in the back of the head. She died instantly. The killer rushed into the house and found the maid, Frances Williams, in the kitchen. She dropped to her knees, dropping dishes as she went. She was shot point blank in the forehead, and she too died instantly. Ed Friendly wore a hearing aid, which he was known to turn off at times, so it is thought he may not have heard the first shots. He was sitting in his bedroom watching television and sipping a drink. He had turned to look down the hallway, but had not risen from his chair. The killer found him in that chair, and as he tried to stand, he was shot once in the chest, throwing him against a bookcase and spattering the Venetian blinds with blood. The killer then stood over his body and shot Friendly once in the head. No one reported shots, and neighbors say they did not hear a thing. Papers were tossed around, pockets were turned inside out, but nothing was taken, not even the $400 in cash plainly visible in Ed Friendly's wallet. This was not a robbery. This was the site of multiple executions. The only thing left at the site were shell casings and a man's fedora that was tossed over the face of Sophia Friendly as she lay dead in the hallway. It was the first triple homicide in the history of Palm Springs. Now, I need to say that I could do an hour-long episode, at least, on nothing more than who the Friendlies were. This was the second marriage for each, and both Ed and Sophia had messy divorces in their past with very rich and famous people. Both had very poor relationships with most of their children, and there was bad blood over money on both sides. It was soon discovered that Sophia was the beneficiary of multiple trust funds, and her ex-husband, Curtis Hutton, would receive $1 million from a trust in his name. This is important because if Curtis died before Sophia, his ex-wife, Sophia would get the $1 million. But if Sophia died before Curtis, their children would receive the $1 million. And Curtis, it seemed, was terminally ill. Police soon learned that 3 weeks prior to the murders, Curtis was visited in his home by he and Sophia's son, Edward Hutton, and a friend of his named Andreas Christensen. Edward was a huge disappointment to his father and mother. He squandered all of the money that came to him and never could hold a job. He was deeply in debt, and a friend was quoted as saying, "Edward Hutton owed money to absolutely everyone." Not only that, but Edward Hutton and his mother, Sophia Hutton Friendly, were locked in a battle over money from the sale of a home in San Francisco. Sophia was supposed to have given her son proceeds from the sale of that home, but instead used them to purchase this home in Palm Springs. Edward Hutton was in desperate need of money and also had these very bad feelings towards his mother because of the situation with the sale of this home. Edward and this friend of his, Andreas Christensen, flew up from Houston to Los Angeles. They rented a Ford sedan and made the trip to go see the elder Hutton, who was dying. No one in the family knew this Andreas Christensen, and they said they found it odd that their brother, son, cousin would bring this stranger to kind of an intimate family situation. So police immediately began investigating Andreas Christensen and Edward Hutton, the son of the now deceased Sophia. 2 weeks after the murders, the elder Curtis Hutton died, and Edward Hutton did in fact split the $1.3 million inheritance with his sister because Sophia was now dead. Again, there is a lot of detail that, for the sake of time for this video, I do have to skip over. But many interviews were conducted by the police, witnesses were gathered, evidence were gathered, trips were taken all over the country and even to Zimbabwe to investigate this Andreas Christensen. But after about 2 years of investigation, the county of Riverside, which is a poor county in California, despite having Palm Springs as part of it, decided that it had spent too much money on this case, and officials pulled the plug completely on the investigation. Andreas Christensen disappeared to the Netherlands, and Edward Hutton moved to Brazil. Both of these countries have anti-extradition laws that prevent people from being extradited to the United States for murder. Andreas Christensen was later arrested for bank robbery in Copenhagen, but even with the assistance of the Danish police who now had him in custody, the investigation into the Friendly's murder went no further. This case has never been solved. No one has ever been formally charged, and the murderer remains at large. Witnesses have now died off, and the whereabouts of key players are unknown. And 42 years later, after that infamous night on a quiet cul-de-sac, as many questions remain as the day the bodies were discovered. We may never know who murdered Ed and Sophia Friendly and Francis Williams as they waited that evening for dinner to come out of the oven. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Deadly Destinations, coming from Palm Springs. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.